Okay, so Dr. Nick, we talked about the importance of purpose, the importance of meaning, the importance of grasping a greater level of understanding and trying to find a way to communicate better to our teams what that purpose may be and how that interaction between us and our team members, are we fulfilling the way in which we want to um, perform, the way we want to behave with one another. But going to the underlying foundation for purpose, how is it that we find meaning in our lives? What are the ways in which you would explain, from your point of view, how does one find meaning?
Uh, Very profound question. And let's see if I can do this some justice. So when we look at factors that are influencing the phenomenon of finding, as you described, how do we find meaning in our lives? So in that explanation of the process of finding, we basically are either gathering information from things that we learn or from things that we discover. Now, knowledge, uh, as you already know, doesn't mean you understand. But when you're growing up, you are taught that there are certain things that have meaning because you learn that from your family. As you mature, you learn now to discover things that are going on outside of what your family's culture may be.
Hmm.
And you start to find other aspects of your own potential. Whether it's in terms of your athleticism, your intellect, your musical abilities. And you probably started developing some of those early on. And then there was a lot of reinforcement,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe positive or negative
Yeah,
reinforcement.
sure.
It started to shape your experience with the phenomenon of finding meaning and purpose.
Right.
Now, because levels of consciousness are essential, and you can't think at a higher level when you're younger. And as you start to mature, you then start to find meaning because you've had the ability to gather much more information and start thinking about it differently.
Yep.
Your levels of consciousness are changing, right?
Yep.
So what I like to always focus on in terms of uh, the way, the path, Tao,
Yeah.
is that either we're going to learn things from a knowledge base, someone's going to teach us. Mentoring is a really good example, right?
Yep.
The other part is then discovering. So how do you know what you don't know? Either you learn it or you discover it. And so that goes back to the whole process of curiosity. So I would say that our finding meaning is driven by a lot of the basics that we were talking about, some things that are inherent, some predispositions, potentials that are within us. And then part of what's going on in the discovery of meaning is the experience of what you're actually going through in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point you decided to do the career that you are doing, but prior to that you've had other exposure and experiences in your athleticism and your musical background. And then all of a sudden you started to make the decision that the purpose of employment or the next step in your personal growth, you made decisions based upon what it is that you already knew.
Mm-hmm.
And then knowing you and seeing what's actually taken place, you made the decision that there were things that you didn't know. And that was then driven by your curiosity and your open-mindedness. So when we look at, the meaning in our life, unless those processes are cultivated, a lot of our purpose is going to be based upon just the experiences that we have, unless we learn to uh, fantasize outside the box and see things that we don't even know that exist within us.
Right.
How can you have a purpose, a full purpose of meaning in life, unless you knew what other potentials there were within your own self? So it becomes very complicated.
Yep. Yeah, and I think this is again another example of an exchange that there was no intent on a conscious intent on your part, but it really speaks to what we're trying to do with this series of conversations is that we don't want to limit what our potentials may be. So when we put this in framing it in a way, whether it's let's just use the analogy that you do have an orchestra and you're the conductor, and you are looking at what is the potential for that orchestra? How good can that orchestra be? Which is going to be an outcome from every individual within that orchestra working on improving and trying to maximize whatever that potential may be in his or herself. So isn't to a certain extent meaning and purpose around just that experience of um, continuing on a journey of fulfilling what your potential may be, and that potential that may be is to a certain extent not so conscious, right? So like we're not always aware of what our potential may be. To a certain extent, we may be somebody may be telling us this is what your potential may be, and we may actually believe that, right? Or it could be that inside you know that no, I don't believe that at all. I think I'm better than that, and that's driving you. So it's something that's happening within you that the question I would have is that a choice I'm making that I decide I'm not going to let something limit me? Do I have control of that choice?
Oh, I think absolutely you have
That's
control of
exactly
that choice. Yeah.
right.
And so I think it always can come back, and clearly when we look at Frankl's work, and that's what he's talking about, is that the one thing that the human continues to have is the ability to make decisions.
Right.
Uh, Even in, when we talked about his experiences in Auschwitz, where there were limitations, but they were not taking away the spirit or the individual's ability to make decisions about how they're going to experience that.
Yeah, and we're gonna discuss that in further detail. But when we think about, because I think that's a real important point here, is that one of the things we want to do as people that do influence others, that our actions can be incongruent with what we actually want to achieve. So if we all go in and everyone will say, absolutely, I want the orchestra to sound the best it possibly can be. I want my team to perform at its highest level. Yet we could be having an impact on limiting what their ultimate performance can be because of we'd be suppressing what that potential may be. But I think someone can counteract whatever environment they are in if they solely almost have like that they're continuing to drive what is my purpose, what is my meaning. So it's a fluid thing that if you continue to try to work on being the best you absolutely become, just that process alone, in my opinion, does enable us to find meaning, because we are in essence working on how an inner spirit. We're working on how we can like this energy within ourselves, which I think to a certain extent we could be trained at an early age to not feel as though we have that
Right.
switch in our control. So and again, there are people that grow up in different environments. They may have had different influences. They could have had
Right.
teachers, coaches, parents, whoever it may be, impacting them in the way that they don't like they stop finding, meaning or purpose because maybe they're stopped finding the curiosity to grow.
Well, this goes right into the whole process of what beliefs are, right? So beliefs are going to predict behaviors. So if the belief is that there are limitations, then your purpose-driven behavior will be based upon an erroneous belief. I can't do anything about the life I'm living because that's the way I was brought up, and you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Right.
But you can. The brain is much more plastic, so we know that there's a lot of adaptation. We used to believe that 40-year-olds could not learn how to play the piano. And we now know that that's not true.
Mhm.
So all of this is going to be based upon beliefs. So even in situations where you talk about someone comes from a culture where there's not a fostering of the kind of indwelling that you're doing with the way in which you're thinking and kind of looking at the world in a very different way, it doesn't mean you can't change your mind about that.
Yes.
That's what this is all about, is the mind control. And we'll talk about the difference between the mind and what's going on with the brain. But it's
Right.
going to come down to what you're describing as the purpose.
Yes.
When that spirit is, coming out of you, when
Yep.
you allow that to take place, and it may be there, but you're not paying attention to it, partially based upon the beliefs, maybe because of the way you were brought up.
Yeah, and I think what we can leave on this topic and go to our next one. But I think that's what is so important, is that we're linking the spirit to purpose and meaning. And I think that's one of the things that we don't spend enough time talking about openly, is that there is a spirit that is driving an individual. There's an inside that we don't always are able to explain or to rationalize, but there is an energy that you know it when you see it. I mean, that's the other thing. I mean, there's very successful teams, and there's where there is an awesome series on ESPN right now that's looking at, called The Last Dance, and it's looking at the inside of the Chicago Bulls. But oh my God, I mean, did Michael Jordan have a spirit of what? I mean, an inner drive, and how contagious that inner drive is. But it's something that we become, I think, as whether it's again when we look at different roles and what we play, that a lot of it is we're looking at um, and evaluating someone's potential strictly from statistics, strictly from data, right? So, is someone a good student or not based on grades, or and is someone have intelligence based on an SAT score, right? So there's all these things that we quantify, which are they're not great predictors anyway of what potentials may be. And the same thing could be in the way in which we do employee evaluations. I mean, a
Right.
lot of them, quite honestly, are crap, but yet those are what are used to reinforce certain behaviors. But again, what we have to spend more time on is trying to connect with the inside of an individual and understand what it is that is making them, to a certain extent, tick.
Well, you can see in your discussion here is based upon what your beliefs are, right? So that if the employee evaluation was based upon the belief that the data is going to tell us the truth, you may actually believe that in spite of the fact that it's not. And people go to war, die, and kill other people based upon what they believe. So beliefs aren't necessarily true.
Right.
So we're always going to come back down to, when you talk about purpose, we have to come back down to what truth is. What
Yeah.
truth is in the individual, and what the truth is of their purpose, and the potentials that people might not understand that exist, but that the truth is still available to them.
Yeah.
So as you know, that um, Michael Jordan got cut in his sophomore year of high school.
Which is incredible. I mean,
It's
that's
incredible.
unbelievably incredible. Yeah.
His potential was still there, but it wasn't actualized.
Yep.
And so when you look at purpose, now, can you imagine if he didn't have the spirit to go on after his sophomore year,
That's right.
what the story would have been? Now, he might not have been a basketball player. Maybe he would have done something else with his life.
Right.
And we can talk about the spirit, because the spirit
Yeah.
doesn't go away. But
Yep. And we'll get into that, because we're going to actually do a specific topic on that exact question about what helped Michael Jordan go on. But we're gonna use that in one of our further discussions. We're going to talk about and what we learned from that past episode, because I thought the way in which he absorbed that failure and the way he went about how to go and counteract that failure is something we all can learn from. So. All right, so thank you. We'll go on to our next one now.
thank you.